Hi, I'm Jean Farish, and this is a very quick tutorial about stitching over two on linen. When we think about linen, it's easy to consider, first of all, color, and also the count of the linen. And these are the two things that are probably the most common concepts or features, characteristics, whatever you want to call it, about linen that stitchers gravitate to. They think in terms of color and count. But there is one more characteristic of linen that's especially important to beginners, and that's the density of the weave. I would suggest that as a beginner that you look for a fairly open weave linen so that the threads are not woven so close together that it makes it difficult to see where you are meant to stitch. I hesitate to start with a negative, but I think I'd like to just get it out of the way up front here. There are two characteristics of linen that discourage many new stitchers from trying linen, or even the more experienced stitcher who is used to stitching on Aida cloth. And that is that linen, by its very nature, does not have a consistent thread width. It is not uncommon to see very thin threads right next to thicker threads in the same fabric. I've never found this to be a problem. The comments I hear from stitchers are things like that it makes your X's an inconsistent size. And I have not found that to be true. The other characteristic of linen that people find offensive sometimes is that linen, by its very nature, again, has slubs in it. And a slub happens when, in the weaving process, the weaver is ending one length of linen and attaching it to the next length. And they're pretty good about this. When you learn a little bit about how linen, which comes from the flax plant, how flax is grown and harvested, and what the steps that are taken to produce linen, then it becomes, I think, a little bit easier to understand where these slubs come from. I went through the linen that was on my shelf to find an example of a slub, and I actually had difficulty finding a really good example. So let me show you what I did find. Now, I laid this linen on a black background so the weave would be very, very evident. That is a slub. You can see where the threads are, they're just not consistent with linen. And if that bothers you, then I would suggest that you stitch on even weaves rather than on linen. But the principles I'm going to show you about stitching over two apply just as easily to an even weave as it does to a linen. I don't have the knowledge or the software or whatever to do all kinds of fancy animations and whatnot. So this is going to be a pretty simple demonstration. I made a grid here that replicates how linen is woven, and it is a very simple weave called a plain weave, where you have a thread that goes over, then under, over, under, over, across like this. And then in the same direction, in the same manner, the other threads are going over, under, etc. And this, again, is what a weaver would call a plain weave. And this is what makes it ideal for something like counted cross stitch. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is some simple terminology. When cross stitchers talk about stitching on linen, what you'll hear people mention are vertical threads and horizontal threads. The vertical threads are the ones that are on the top in any given intersection. So that's a vertical thread. This is 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 a vertical thread. You also have vertical threads here and here and here. So these are all vertical threads. And you'll notice that there's a pattern where we have a vertical thread followed by a horizontal thread, vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical, etc. And this is what makes, again, this ideal for counted cross stitch. Now that we have that terminology out of the way, what you need to do in order to be successful at stitching on linen or even weave over 2 is for your eye to be able to pick out the difference between these 2 threads. Now, right now, I'm going to focus on what we call the vertical threads. And before this segment is over, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. The next thing I want to point out to you is that each square on a cross-stitch chart is representing this type of an arrangement. So that would be covered by 1 cross stitch. If you've been stitching on Aida exclusively, then what I drew in that square is where you would normally stitch 1 stitch on Aida. When you have time, if again, for those of you who are Aida stitchers who are transitioning into linen, take a close look at your Aida cloth. You are actually stitching 4/4. Each square in Aida are 4 linen or 4 cotton threads going this way, crossing 4 cotton threads crossing this way, and they are interwoven with each other. Aida is a fairly new fabric. It's only been around since the late 1800s, from what little bit of research that I've done. Linen is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, centuries old. I think the oldest piece of linen I ever saw was like 5,000 years old in a museum. So when you think about stitching on linen, please understand that in the sisterhood of stitchers throughout the ages, primarily women, but also men, have been stitching on linen far, far longer than they've ever been stitching on Aida. So what is the importance of these vertical threads? They serve a really good purpose. They are a tool in your stitching tool belt to help you keep track of where your stitches need to start. If you start each stitch so that vertical thread is to your right, whether you're making complete stitches or stitching a half cross and then going back and crossing them, being able to identify that vertical thread helps you keep your place. It will prevent you from accidentally starting, say, here, because you're not next to a vertical thread. You're next to a horizontal thread. So that's the only reason why this vertical thread thing becomes important, is it helps you see where all the squares are. On Aida, you're used to just being able to see the squares because in each corner you have a very distinct hole. Well, so do linen stitchers. You have a hole here and a hole here and a hole here and a hole here, and that's where you're stitching. So even when there are spaces between stitches, say for example, if you're not stitching here, you'll know to come up 2 linen threads to start again because you have this vertical thread. And so you'll know that that stitch is going to line up with all the others. Keeping track of your vertical thread is not going to prevent you from making any stitching mistakes on linen. So let me be very clear about that. But it is a good tool to help you keep track of stitching over 2, because every other thread is a vertical thread. So when you have a vertical thread and then a horizontal one and a vertical, then you know that you are starting by that only by the vertical threads, then you're automatically stitching by 2s. Now, before I leave you with this today, I do want to also make one thing clear, and I hope it isn't going to confuse my new stitchers, but I feel very, very strongly about this. There are some myths floating around the internet that go like this. If you don't start by a vertical thread, your stitches will fall out. Or if you don't start by a vertical thread, your stitch will slide behind a linen thread and it just, you won't be able to see it. Those things are simply not true. As I've been emphasizing starting by a vertical thread, you could start next to a horizontal thread as long as that's what you're always doing, because every other intersection has a horizontal thread on top also. So it doesn't really matter which thread you are starting next to as long as you are consistent. Some people see that vertical thread and it just pops right out at them. Some people see the horizontal thread and it pops right out at them. So either way is okay as long as you're being consistent when you're stitching over 2. One of the reasons I feel so passionate about this is that when I'm teaching pulled thread work, which has to be done on linen, it can't be done on Aida, some of the stitches are over 3 or over 5. And inevitably, in every class, whenever I'm teaching face-to-face, there will be somebody who will have that sort of deer in headlights look that will say, wait a minute, you mean I need to start by a horizontal thread? And they just can't get past that. They are so used to being told that you have to start by vertical thread when you're stitching on linen. So again, it's a tool, it's not a mandate. And that's basically it. I mean, as you saw, I didn't even thread a needle to show you how to stitch on linen, because I'm not necessarily teaching you how to do cross stitch. I'm telling you how to apply cross stitch to linen. So your next step is to put into practice what I've told you today. Quite literally, take a scrap. If you've already bought a piece of linen with the idea of doing a project like our stitch along called Hearts Come Home at Christmas, then just kind of in the margins, in the area that's not going to show when you frame it or make it into a pillow or whatever, use that area to practice what I've just talked about. And trust me, after a while, you will wonder what all the fuss is about. It will become so automatic, you will wonder why you ever resisted this idea of stitching on linen, because you can do it. I know you can.